Welcome to your Get That Nugget for GCSE English Language. Today we'll be concentrating on giving you a framework to answer paper 2 question 5, the writing section. This session is to complement your lessons with your teachers and not to replace them in any way. So to begin, I just want to recap the assessment objectives for this question. Now you'll be familiar already that these are the same assessment objectives as paper 1 question 5, which is great for us because that means that we just need to concentrate on the same sort of thing, but we adapt our writing style. So we know it's a 40-mark question, so let's just remind you of that breakdown. So for 24 marks, that's our assessment objective 5. We need to communicate clearly and effectively, and we need to adapt our writing to suit the purpose. We need to organise that information and ideas for effect. So what we mean by that is they will ask you to write a certain form. So it could be letter, it could be a speech, it could be an article. There are various other things they could ask you as well, but they are the three most popular so far. And the skills can be adapted, so how you write them and the content doesn't differ that much, but the actual structure and the layout of that text will differ. So you need to be really clear about what you need to write, how you need to specifically answer the question in terms of what they are asking you to do. For example, if they ask you to write a speech, that's very different from when you structure an article, but we'll look at that in nuggets to come. And finally, for the assessment objective 6, so this is our 16 marks, this is our total 40. The mark out of 16 is about our range of vocabulary, our sentence structures, and then our spelling and punctuation. Please don't panic if you aren't the most confident speller, that's okay. I think I've mentioned this before, but if you have a bit of a list of vocab in your head that you can use, that you learn how to spell, and then you can use that no matter what question they give you. So it's really important to do a bit of prep work for question 5, and then that will help you succeed in the exam. Okay, so what I want to do today is we're going to look at a speech and what a speech entails. So again, as I said, question 5 on this paper, the actual content of what you write and the approach to the question won't differ, but the way that you write it will do. So we'll concentrate on a speech in this nugget, and we're going to show you what we need to include in that speech and what the exam board is waiting and expecting us to do. So as a minimum, what we need to do for a speech is we need a simple address to an audience. So that could be something like good morning, thank you for being here, welcome, something that addresses that audience, that makes it really clear for your examiner that you are about to deliver a speech. I know it can be tricky because you're actually writing it, but you need to remember that if you're being asked to write a speech, it is something that is going to be read out or should be read out. There's going to be different sections of text, so you're obviously going to be using paragraphs there. You're not going to have just one continuous paragraph where there's no breaking up of that text. We need to make sure we are using paragraphs. And then finally, as a minimum, a final address to an audience. So that can be as simple as thank you for listening. Keep it nice and simple, and then you are showing that you have written a speech. So there's nothing too difficult in that, but that is a minimum. That is what they are, as a very minimum expectation, that is what you should do. But obviously, we want a secure response. We want our answer to be strong and secure. So what we're going to need to do is we need to take that step further and make sure that we've got detailed indicators of form. So basically what that means is we need to make it even clearer for our examiner that we are writing a speech. And the way that we are being asked to do that is things like a clear address to an audience. So if you're being asked to talk to students, you mentioned that. If you're being asked to talk to governors or parents or a local community, you make that really clear in your opening. You will have effective and fluently linked sections that are sequenced. So you've planned a response and they flow. Your ideas flow in together. It doesn't sound like you've forgotten something and then just shoehorned it in somewhere. It actually makes sense as you read it. And proofreading will be really key for this. And of course, planning. Planning is very, very important to make sure that this happens. Rhetorical indicators that an audience is being addressed throughout. So it needs to be consistently throughout the speech that you are talking to an audience. And that can be quite an easy thing to do. And we'll have a little look at that today as well. And then finally, something that I've already mentioned as a minimum, but even as a detailed indicator, they're accepting thank you for listening. Very, very clear sign off. really effective and actually not something that's too complicated to remember. So that's what we're expected to do as a minimum, and then a bit more detailed. Once you know these for each of the text types, everything that you write can be adapted according to what they ask you to do. So we looked in previous nuggets at the idea of what a letter includes and what an article includes. And then we also looked at the idea of using the question to help you with that response. That is what the question is there to do. It's there to give you some guidance and to help you navigate through a response. No one's expecting you to be the greatest speechwriter or the greatest article writer. They understand that this is an exam and it's pressure, but this is your golden opportunity to show off and showcase your personality and what you can do, and to show that you can write. And that's a really, really powerful thing that you're going to be able to do. Okay, so this is what we are expected to do. What I would like to do is have a quick recap before we even think about planning a speech. Just a very quick recap about DEFOREST. It may be called something different from what you're used to, but no matter what they ask you to write, use about 100% of the time, I would say, you're going to be using direct address. Of course, it depends on what the question is, but I'd be very, very surprised if you didn't use direct address. And that's the kind of thing we need to be effective with. So we need to make sure that we are directly addressing our reader or our audience. So when you do that, it actually includes your reader or your audience, and it makes what you're saying seem powerful when you collectively talk with them. So we must ensure, we cannot ignore, you must understand. You're really addressing them directly, and that's a very powerful tool to use in any writing that you're doing for paper 2 question 5. Of course, alliteration, an old favourite. I'm not going to explain that, you know what that is. Anecdote is where we take our response to the next level though. An anecdote can be so powerful in a piece of writing. It makes your reader or your audience relate to you, and in another case, obviously the examiner, but it makes it seem like you are using yourself to prove a point. And even if you're not asked to be writing persuasively, an anecdote, as long as it fits in with the question, is appropriate, is a very powerful thing to use. Again, fact and opinion, we know what they are, but it will depend on what you're being asked to write. I would assume 9 times out of 10 you are going to be writing opinions anyway, because most of it will be opinion, of course, but facts can be used to argue a point. So if you have to be persuasive, if you have to be arguing, then facts are good as well. Equally, you don't have to use actual factual facts, if that makes sense. You're not going to be an expert on every topic they ask you. It could be something quite obscure or something you're not quite comfortable with, but if you make them up, that's okay as well. If you make them up, they just need to sound realistic. So you can't say things like 100% of women have blonde hair, because that's not factual. You need to make sure your facts are, let's say, somewhat believable. Let's go with that. So just be careful with that. If you are writing facts, don't be put off by the idea that you might not know what the content's about, but please try and make them realistic. Rhetorical question. I doubt there's going to be any question ever, any type of text ever, that you are not going to use a rhetorical question for. Get used to these and get used to using them, because they are so powerful, and they can be used for a structural feature. They can be used as a closing line. Even in a speech, when you're going to end with something like "thank you for listening," I would have a rhetorical question just before that, because that is the last opportunity to show your examiner that you are smart and you're going to leave them thinking of something. And so a rhetorical question is so powerful, and I would get that in every piece of writing that you use. Of course, we can always use that. We can also use them in creative writing responses. So definitely, rhetorical question is going to be like your new best friend. Exaggeration. So you can exaggerate as much as possible, but this comes with a bit of caveat. You need to be realistic and sensible with the exaggeration. So if you're going to say something is the worst in the world, of course, that's fine. Largest, biggest, smallest, whatever it needs to be. But don't make it ridiculous. Don't make it silly. So just be a bit careful with exaggeration if you're going to use it. If you're being asked to write a article, speech, letter, then of course you're probably going to be arguing on a case of something where you could have an expert opinion. So this is quite effective in trying to be persuasive. So if you have to be persuasive, get an expert opinion in there. Your audience is far more likely to believe you. Emotive language is another favourite of mine. I think that whatever you write, if you get some emotive language in there, get it really emotional. Again, not silly. Don't take it too far, otherwise it would probably not make much sense to anyone. But if you get a bit of emotive language in there, that can be so powerful. It means your reader, your examiner, your audience starts to get on your side and actually starts to think about, well, actually, they're right, or yes, that's made me feel a certain way. Again, as I said, don't take it too far, because it does become a bit silly and we don't want that. We want to avoid that. Last two, so statistic, very good one. So a bit like a expert opinion, statistic can be really persuasive in trying to make your reader, your audience, understand or showcase some of the information that you've got. Again, that can also be used in a fact, just some new numbers. Please remember, with statistics, this is an English exam, so don't use the numbers, write the number. So if you're going to write 2, don't write 2, you're going to write 2. Okay, so please make sure you do that. There's nothing worse than having a beautiful speech or a letter or an article and then they ruin it by writing the numbers rather than the words. Please make sure you write the words. And then finally, a triplet or a list of 3, whatever you're used to. This can be used in any way. So it can be used in the way that I've shown here, or it could be 3 adjectives. It could be a triplet of short sentences. They are just quite an effective way of persuading and explaining, and you can do it to inform. A triplet can be used anywhere, including creative writing. So triplet, much like alliteration and rhetorical question, you're going to use everywhere anyway. So I would make sure you're trying to do that. And actually, even if you can't do a triplet, doing 2 is quite effective, but obviously a triplet is better. Okay, so that is what I wanted to show you in terms of techniques. What we're going to do is try and think about how we use these techniques in terms of a question. So in the following nugget, I'm going to show you how to plan a speech. But what I would like you to do, and I think would be really, really effective, is if you go away with this question and you try to come up with some DEFOREST techniques that you could possibly use. So this question, the natural world is incredibly fragile and humans are most responsible for ruining it. So all you're going to do is you're going to ignore this right now, except for the idea that you're arguing for or against. And it's for a school geography competition. So you're not writing a speech, that's the bit I want you to ignore. But what you are going to do is you are going to plan techniques that you could possibly use using DEFOREST. And that's a really good way of practicing those techniques without having to worry about spending an hour writing it. If you practice those techniques, come up with some ideas, and I'm sure if you show your teacher, they'd be really happy to give you some feedback on that.